There wasn't supposed to be a naval battle in the Ukraine war. Russia had all the cards, including the Black Sea Fleet, which alone was stronger than the entire Ukrainian navy. The water should have been Russia's. Instead, Vladimir Putin and his flailing forces have had to endure almost 4 years of waterbound embarrassment at the hands of Ukraine. And it's just happened again. Russia thought that keeping one of its strongest warships in a port well outside of Ukraine's territory would be enough to protect it, but that warship has been crushed by Ukraine and Putin's navy has been humiliated again. On November 25th, United 24 media reported on early claims that one of Ukraine's drones had managed to break through the Russian defenses at Novorossiysk and score a direct hit on a Russian warship. The attack was part of a larger series of strikes that saw Ukraine hit several military and logistics facilities in the town, which is located in Krasnodar Krai and is home to one of the largest ports in the entire Black Sea basin. Novorossiysk is an obvious target for Ukraine due to the role that it plays in enabling Russia to export its oil to customers all over the world. However, Ukraine's late November attack saw it hit something other than the port itself, something that Russia thought was safe. According to the Ukrainian outlet Hromadska, the Novorossiysk strike was carried out by a combination of several of Ukraine's most important special military branches. Those included the Security Service of Ukraine, the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and Ukraine's main intelligence directorate. Those 3 branches of Ukraine's military worked alongside the country's border guards, unmanned systems forces, navy, and its missile and artillery troops to unleash a storm of drones and missiles on Novorossiysk. Those groups must have known something that nobody else did. In addition to once again devastating the port itself, and this isn't the first time that Ukraine has attacked Novorossiysk, the Ukrainian drones scored direct hits on a massive Russian warship stationed in the increasingly vulnerable port. That warship was a Project 1171 Tapir-class vessel, which is a type of landing ship that Russia has likely used to send troops from Novorossiysk into occupied Crimea and perhaps even mainland Ukraine. Tapir-class ships are among the largest amphibious vessels that the Russian Navy has, and they're the perfect choice for transporting military equipment and personnel. WeaponsSystems.net says that these ships were developed during the early 1960s, making them yet another of the Soviet-era relics that Russia has deployed against Ukraine, and that they had their main production run between 1964 and 1975. That should immediately ring some alarm bells for Putin and his cronies. This is a type of ship that Russia hasn't built for 50 years, certainly not in any mass production capacity. A Tapir-class vessel lost is a ship that is unlikely to ever be replaced. Russia managed to build 14 of a planned 15 Tapir-class ships during the vessel's main production run, demonstrating that Russia's many shipbuilding issues aren't exactly a modern problem. It was failing to hit its targets half a century ago. As for the ship itself, it has a crew of 55, including 5 officers, and is capable of reaching a top speed of 17.3 knots. Maintaining that sort of speed reduces the ship's range, as it can sail 6,300 nautical miles at 17 knots, 7,650 nautical miles at 16 knots, and a fairly impressive, for a Russian ship, 9,150 nautical miles if it keeps its speed down to 9 knots. The amount a Tapir-class can carry depends on the version of the ship. Russia created 6 of these vessels before tweaking the design for the final 8. Both versions can carry up to 1,000 tons of cargo. Those made during the first batch can also transport 313 assault troops, along with either 20 main battle tanks, 47 BTR armored personnel carriers, or 52 trucks. The second batch of Tapir-class ships maintains the same numbers for the vehicles, but increases the number of troops carried to 440. Tapir-class ships are also far from defenseless. Most come equipped with a pair of ZIF 31B 57mm guns along with 1,200 rounds of stored ammunition. The last 2 ships built in the class switched this up by replacing the 2 57mm guns with 4 2M 3M 25mm guns. The ships are also equipped with 24 surface-to-air missiles to help them deal with aerial threats. The last 8 that Russia built are also loaded with a 40-tube A215 Grad-M rocket artillery system, along with 160 rockets. This was a fairly decent ship for the Soviet era. And though it is outdated now, the Tapir-class is still useful as a landing ship that can defend itself when needed. Ukraine may have seen an opportunity to take out an important part of the Russian Navy on November 25th. However, there was one caveat to the United 24 media report that we mentioned earlier. It was unconfirmed. That is, until November 26th, when the same outlet published a follow-up report revealing that satellite imagery from the Novorossiysk port had revealed that the Tapir-class rumored to have been struck by a Ukrainian drone was in pretty bad shape. It points to photos published by an open-source intelligence researcher named Tom Bike, who took to X to showcase his findings. Along with a satellite picture, Bike said that the Russian ship had been spotted in naval base breakwaters, being towed by 2 tugs from the dock where she was to another protected place inside breakwaters for repairs. Towing alone wouldn't prove that the Tapir-class ship was damaged. Ships get towed in and out of ports all the time. However, United 24 media says that the use of a pair of tugboats instead of one indicates an issue for the Russian ship, which might be that multiple tugboats were needed to keep it stable in the water. That's supported by the outlet's mention of the Tapir-class ship's movements as it was being towed, which it claimed indicates significant damage to the ship. Tom Bike noted that Russian naval forces frequently rotate vessel positions within ports to reduce the risk of repeat attacks, United 24 media says. The latest imagery, however, shows clear signs of distress, with the ship being repositioned for likely repairs. We don't know the name of the ship that Ukraine just took down. Russia has 2 known Tapir-class vessels remaining in its Black Sea fleet named the Orsk and the Nikolai Filchenkov. So the scuttled ship is most likely one of those 2. But beyond that, there are no further details, and Russia hasn't confirmed the loss of one of its warships to Ukraine's drones. Russia did respond to the Ukrainian drone assault that devastated Novorossiysk, though, and that response was interesting. On November 25th, Business Insider reported that Russia's response to Ukraine's Novorossiysk strike was to fire surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs. That's a pretty standard response. SAMs are one of the best choices for taking out incoming drones and cruise missiles. Russia's problem is that those SAMs weren't fired at Ukraine's projectiles. They were fired at residential buildings in Novorossiysk. Russia responded to Ukraine launching a massive attack on one of its most important Black Sea port cities by punching itself in the face. The outlet quotes an anonymous Ukrainian source as providing the information, in addition to linking to a short video shared by the OSINT Technical X account, showing that this isn't just a claim Ukraine is using to rub salt in the Russian wounds. The 8 seconds of footage shows a SAM being fired high into the air before arcing back down toward the ground. It touches down with a lot of force at a location that seems to be just a few dozen feet away from the person recording. As the X channel Riley puts it, "Seen here, a Russian surface-to-air missile intercepts a Russian apartment building. Those buildings sure are dangerous." So let's sum up. First, Ukraine humiliated Russia by taking out yet another of its warships in a devastating drone strike. With the egg still dripping off its face, maybe the yolk obstructed the vision of the Russian defenders, Russia responded by firing missiles at itself. Oh, and the Tapir-class ship is just one of the targets that Ukraine hit in Novorossiysk during this strike. United 24 media points out that Ukraine also scored direct hits on a drone plant, an oil refinery, and the Sheskaris oil terminal. Ukraine also hit the positions of S-300 and S-400 air defenses, the New Voice of Ukraine says in its report on the damage caused to the Russian ship. That is an extremely productive night for Ukraine, and those living in Novorossiysk will be asking themselves why the city isn't being defended better than it is. The sarcastic response is that Russia is trying to defend this vital port system. However, the S-300s and S-400s it's using for the job are apparently in flames, and the pantsir lobbing SAMs into the skies has apparently taken a disliking to Novorossiysk's apartment buildings, like an enraged architect who happens to be equipped with a rocket launcher. But a more serious answer is that nobody knows why Putin isn't doing more to protect Novorossiysk. After all, it's not like this is an unimportant city, either in general or in the context of the war. We mentioned earlier that the city is home to one of the largest Black Sea ports and that Russia uses this port to export oil to its customers all around the world. But that doesn't do the Novorossiysk port justice. As the New York Times explained in a 2023 profile of the port, the Novorossiysk commercial seaport is one of Russia's largest by volume and among the biggest in Europe, a key node in the export of Russian grain, oil, and other products to countries around the world. Putin spent a lot of Russia's money on building a naval base in Novorossiysk prior to Russia's annexation of Crimea, the outlet adds. The port allows Russia to send ships in the direction of Asia, South America, Europe, and Africa, with Putin having also previously promised several leaders from the latter continent that Russia will be providing free grain that will presumably be passed through Novorossiysk. Putin's attempts to curry political favor aren't being helped by Ukraine repeatedly hitting the port, through which he wants to deliver that grain that allows him to spread Russia's influence throughout Africa. There's also the oil to consider. Marine Insight reported that the Novorossiysk port processes around 2.2 million barrels of oil daily, which means that about 2% of the entire world's oil supply comes out of this single port. Those numbers were provided in an article detailing another Ukrainian strike earlier in November that forced the entire port to close down. Ukraine has been hitting Novorossiysk often and hard. Taking down a Russian warship, along with everything else that it hit in its most recent strike, reveals that Russia isn't doing enough to protect this vital city. That's a problem, and it may be linked to the complete collapse of Russian air defenses to the point where the country has gone from having a massive advantage over Ukraine in that department to being symmetrical with the country. You can learn more about what that means along with the dire state of Russia's air defenses in our video. That air defense issue adds another layer of humiliation to an incident that has already left Russia's Navy red-faced. But let's face it, it's not like the Russian Navy hasn't experienced plenty of embarrassment already during the Ukraine war. The loss of a Tapir-class landing vessel only adds another ship to the dozens that Russia has managed to lose in a fight against a country that barely has a navy of its own to speak of. Russia's entire Black Sea strategy has been a fiasco, almost from the very start, and that simply didn't seem like it would have been the case when the Ukraine invasion was launched and when the once dreaded Black Sea fleet was being touted as a difference-maker in the war. That difference-maker is all but defeated. By August of 2024, Ukraine had managed to take out a third of the Black Sea fleet using missiles and drones. This not only humiliated Russia's navy, but it made the Russian command realize that none of its ships were safe in the Black Sea anymore. Even some of Russia's strongest warships, including the Moskva, which was the fleet's flagship, had been sent to watery graves or damaged so much as to make them useless. More followed, and Russia soon figured out that it needed to withdraw its entire fleet from the Black Sea, with most of the ships heading back to occupied Crimea. The Atlantic Council points out that the Black Sea fleet had been rendered functionally inactive, per the UK's Ministry of Defence, by the spring of 2024. The outlet added that Putin's unerring ability to distort reality to the point that he still enjoys majority support for the Ukraine war would likely be enough for him to hide the humiliation of what had happened in the Black Sea. But operationally, Russia was weakened, as it can no longer block that waterway or use it to send troops and equipment into Ukraine anywhere near as effectively as it thought it would be able to. In October 2024, the conversation piled onto Russia's Black Sea woes, noting that Russia's loss of control over that waterway had ramifications stretching far beyond the war. And this loss has potentially far-reaching consequences, the outlet exclaimed. Not only does it constrain Moscow's ability to project power across the globe through naval means, it has also resulted in Russia's growing cooperation with China, where Moscow is emerging as a junior party to Beijing on the high seas. It added that Russia's Black Sea issue meant that it could only project power beyond its own territory with the help of China from now on. Even joint naval exercises held between the two countries, such as those carried out in July 2024, showcased the growing disconnect between the strength of the two countries. China and Russia both claim these exercises foster cooperation. The reality is that they demonstrate how China has become the leader and Russia the follower. Yet more humiliation would come in April. That's when United 24 media reported that the loss of all Russia's naval power in the Black Sea had gotten even worse. The declining number of combat-ready Russian ships that Putin sent to Crimea to put them out of range of Ukraine's drones and missiles was now gone. That was according to Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk, who explained that Ukraine knows how many of those retreated ships Russia has left and, more importantly, that it knows the condition those vessels are in. The number is known. It's quite difficult to hide such large objects to the point where they can't be counted, Pletenchuk claimed. But the remaining vessels from the combat fleet are either currently not combat-ready or undergoing major repairs. Repairs we sometimes help modernize with airstrikes. The rest belongs to the fleet's auxiliary forces. These are non-combat ships and don't pose any significant threat. We mentioned earlier that the Tapir-class ship Ukraine struck in Novorossiysk was part of the Black Sea fleet. That ship had been forced to withdraw into actual Russian territory rather than occupied Crimea. United 24 media's report suggests that it wasn't alone. The withdrawal of combat-ready ships from Crimea likely came as a result of Ukraine proving that it could hit all of the key ports in that peninsula. Ukraine has now proven that Novorossiysk is easily within the range of Ukraine's drones and missiles. Does that mean yet another embarrassing withdrawal is coming for the Black Sea fleet? And if that withdrawal comes, what's the point of Russia having a naval presence in the Black Sea at all? There is no point, and Ukraine seems to have now reached the stage where it can pick Russian ships off at a distance that would have once played key roles in Putin's invasion. Russia's naval situation is so bad that Putin cancelled the country's annual Navy Day parade in July, amidst concerns that Ukraine's drones could strike the ships that it usually parades around St. Petersburg. That risk was very real. So too was the risk that nobody would be impressed by the smaller number and stature of the ships that Russia has available to parade. With the Black Sea fleet rendered practically useless, Ukraine has also been heaping humiliation on Russia by targeting the shadow fleet ships that Putin uses to sell illicit oil and other products around the world. In July, Chuck Farrar of the Kyiv Post wrote a piece detailing around half a dozen strikes against shadow fleet ships believed to have been conducted by Ukraine. Some of those strikes occurred a long way outside of Russian territory, suggesting that Ukraine has covert operatives in several of the countries to which Russia sells its oil. As Farrar puts it, Putin's shadow fleet, once a symbol of Russian defiance, is now a vulnerable liability, with every tanker a potential target. As Ukraine refines its unconventional arsenal, the Kremlin faces a stark reality: no vessel is safe and the web is closing in. Losing ships that Ukraine wasn't even supposed to know existed was bad enough for Putin. However, consider what Ukraine's targeting these ships means for the Russian Navy. Ukraine has completely eradicated the presence of the Black Sea Fleet, so that it now has time to pick and choose naval targets that don't necessarily represent a direct threat to the country. Russia's warships should be Ukraine's only concern, but it's been carrying out strikes against old tankers for much of 2025 because those warships are non-factors. The attack on the Tapir-class ship in Novorossiysk may be a case of Ukraine taking advantage of a warship being within its range once again. That will concern Putin. He may have hoped that withdrawing the Black Sea Fleet would take the remaining ships out of Ukraine's sights. Ukraine just showed Russia's leader that none of its ships, at least those that could affect Ukraine, are out of Ukraine's reach. And due to the ever-growing gaps in Russia's air defenses, it wouldn't be surprising if Ukraine followed up its strike on Russia's Tapir-class ship with another attack that takes out a vessel that Putin thought was safe. As Ukraine batters Russia's ships and ports with its drones and missiles, Sweden has just shown Russia that Putin has plenty to worry about from other countries that he may have his eyes on invading. A Swedish official has called for his country to get its hands on a Kremlin killer missile that can strike Moscow if Russia ever pushes too far. That missile terrifies Putin even more than NATO, and you can find out why in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of the many failures of the Russian Navy. And thank you for watching.